Imagine working your entire life to buy your dream home, only to have a racist neighbor treat it like her personal playground. Justin was a hard-working black homeowner who had just achieved his biggest milestone, a house with a private pool. But his peace was shattered when Karen, his entitled white neighbor, decided she had the right to use his pool whenever she pleased. When Justin put a stop to it, she did the unthinkable. She called the cops on him. But what she didn't know? Justin was about to uncover something that would ruin her life forever. Justin had spent years working toward this dream. A home in an upscale, peaceful neighborhood with a private pool in the backyard. It was more than just a luxury. It was a symbol of his hard work, perseverance, and success. At 38 years old, he had finally reached a level where he could enjoy the fruits of his labor without anyone questioning if he belonged. But someone did question it. His neighbor, Karen. Karen was in her mid-40s, a self-entitled white woman who had lived in the neighborhood long before Justin arrived. Unlike his other neighbors, she never greeted him, never made an effort to be friendly. But somehow she felt entitled enough to use his pool. The first time he saw her, he was confused. He had stepped outside one warm summer afternoon to check on his yard, only to find Karen floating on a raft in his pool, sipping a drink like she owned the place. His first thought was that maybe she was lost. Maybe she had wandered into the wrong yard. "Excuse me, ma'am, this is private property," he said politely, trying not to sound aggressive. Karen barely looked up from her sunglasses-clad face. She simply waved a hand as if shooing away an insect. "Oh, it's just a pool. What's the big deal? We're neighbors." Justin blinked. Did she seriously just say that? "Right, but this is my backyard." Karen sat up slightly, frowning like she was inconvenienced. "It's just water, sweetheart. It's not like I'm hurting anything." Justin took a deep breath. He wasn't trying to make a scene. He wasn't the kind of guy who lost his temper over small things. "I understand that, but this isn't a community pool. It's my private property." Karen rolled her eyes as if he were being ridiculous. Then, she stood up, grabbed one of his towels from the chair nearby, and dried herself off like she belonged there. All right. Don't be so uptight." She gathered her things and left through the side gate. The gate she obviously knew existed. Justin stood there, stunned. Did she just act like he was the one being unreasonable? He brushed it off. Maybe it was a misunderstanding. Maybe she wouldn't do it again. But then she did. 2 days later, he walked outside and found Karen lounging by the pool again. This time, she wasn't alone. She had invited 2 of her friends. They were laughing, drinking wine, making themselves comfortable like this was a vacation spot. Justin had had enough. "Karen, what the hell? I told you this is my property. You can't just bring people over like this." Karen looked annoyed, not guilty. "Oh, relax," she sighed, taking a sip from her wine glass. "This whole area was built for the community. It's not like you even use it that much." Justin gritted his teeth. The audacity of this woman. "It doesn't matter how often I use it. I paid for this house. This is my pool." Karen tilted her head, smirking. "Well, if you can afford it, I should be able to use it too." Justin felt something deep in his gut twist. That comment. It wasn't just entitlement. It was something more. Karen wasn't just ignoring boundaries. She didn't believe he deserved to have this house. Justin took a deep breath, forcing himself to remain calm. "I'm asking you nicely, Karen. Stop trespassing." Karen scoffed, grabbing another one of his towels and wrapping it around herself. "People like you shouldn't be so selfish." With that, she strutted toward the side gate and disappeared. Justin stood there, fists clenched. He knew then, being polite wasn't going to work. Karen wasn't just rude. She was dangerous. And he wasn't going to let this slide anymore. Justin knew one thing for sure. Karen wasn't going to stop unless he made her. She had already ignored his warnings, disregarded his property rights, and treated his pool like a public amenity. If words wouldn't work, action would. The next morning, Justin installed a high-quality lock on his backyard gate. It was sturdy, tamper-proof, and required a key to open. But that wasn't all. He also set up security cameras around the perimeter of his property. Now he could monitor everything from his phone, If Karen tried to pull anything, he'd have video proof. For extra measure, he put up a large metal sign right next to the gate. Private property. No trespassing violators will be prosecuted. He even made sure the lettering was bold and impossible to miss. For the first time in weeks, he felt a sense of peace. For 2 days, there was no sign of Karen. No uninvited guests, no entitled comments, just peace. But that didn't last long. On the third afternoon, Justin was inside his home when he suddenly heard it. Bang, bang, bang. Someone was shaking his backyard gate violently. Justin's stomach clenched. He already knew who it was. Pulling out his phone, he opened his security feed. There she was, Karen. Her face was red with fury, her lips moving rapidly as she muttered to herself. She grabbed the locked gate with both hands, shaking it violently. Justin tapped the audio feed on his phone and heard her snarling under her breath. Unbelievable, locking me out of my own neighborhood. Who does he think he is? She rattled the gate harder, kicking the bottom of it. Justin exhaled sharply, shaking his head. This woman had lost it. Then suddenly, Karen stopped. She pulled out her phone. Justin's stomach sank. He already knew what was coming. Seconds later, he heard it, the distant wail of police sirens. Karen stepped back from the gate, hands on her hips, trying to look like a victim. A minute later, 2 police officers pulled up in front of his house. Karen immediately ran up to them, waving her arms dramatically. "Thank God you're here," she gasped, pointing toward Justin's house. "That man is threatening me." Justin closed his eyes for a brief second. He had seen too many stories like this. A white woman calling the cops on a black man, spinning a story, playing the victim. And he knew exactly how bad this could go. Taking a deep breath, he stepped outside, slowly, carefully, making sure his hands were visible. The older officer, a man in his 50s with tired eyes, glanced at Karen before turning toward Justin. "Sir, we got a call about a disturbance. Would you mind telling us what's going on?" Justin met the officer's gaze calmly. "I'd be happy to, officer. In fact, I have security footage of the whole thing." Karen's face twisted. She knew exactly what was about to happen, and for the first time since this started. She looked nervous. Justin took a deep breath, stepping outside with his hands clearly visible. He knew how easily these situations could escalate. He had to stay calm, collected. "Good afternoon, officers. What seems to be the problem?" His voice was steady, but inside, frustration burned. Before the officers could speak, Karen lunged forward, her finger shaking as she pointed at him. "He locked me out for no reason. He's trying to intimidate me. I feel threatened." Justin forced himself to stay composed. He had done nothing wrong, but that had never stopped stories like this from ending badly. The 2 officers, Denton, white, 45, stocky, with a permanent scowl, and Pratt, white, 38, shorter, but sharp-eyed, exchanged glances. They weren't entirely buying Karen's hysterics, but they weren't dismissing her either. Denton cleared his throat and adjusted his belt, stepping forward. "Sir," he said, his voice gruff. "Did you threaten this woman?" Justin met his gaze, unwavering. "I haven't even spoken to her today, but I do have security footage." Karen's face twitched. Her mouth opened, then shut. For the first time, uncertainty flashed across her features. "He's lying!" she screeched, stepping toward the officers. "He's been harassing me for weeks. He put up that lock just to keep me out." Justin remained silent. Instead, he reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, and tapped the screen. He turned it toward the officers. Karen froze. The video played. Clear as day, it showed Karen rattling the locked gate, yelling to herself, pacing furiously, and pulling out her phone to call the cops. Denton and Pratt leaned in, watching in silence. It was all there. Her attempts to break into Justin's pool area, her rage-filled tantrum, and her completely false 911 call. Pratt let out a low whistle. He raised an eyebrow, looking at Denton. Denton exhaled heavily, his expression hardening. He looked up from the phone and turned toward Karen, his patience completely gone. "Ma'am," he said, his voice firm, "this is his property. You have no right to be here." Karen's body went rigid. Her face turned a deep shade of red, and her hands balled into fists at her sides. But, he's keeping me out on purpose, she whined, her voice rising in desperation. Justin couldn't help himself. His lips curled into a slow smirk. Yes, Karen, he said, voice dripping with sarcasm. That's the point. Karen looked like she was about to explode. Her breath hitched, her nostrils flared, and she shook with fury. The officers, however, were done entertaining her nonsense. Denton straightened up. Ma'am, if you step onto this property again, you'll be arrested for trespassing. Do you understand? Karen's entire body trembled. She opened her mouth, then snapped it shut. She turned on her heel and stomped away, her fists clenched so tightly her knuckles turned white. Justin watched her retreat, shaking his head. But deep down, he knew one thing for certain. This wasn't over. Karen wasn't the type to let things go. And what she didn't know? Justin wasn't done either. He had an idea, and it would change everything. Karen storms off, humiliated, but Justin knows she isn't done. Karen's face had turned red with rage when the officers told her to leave. She had stomped away, muttering under her breath. But Justin wasn't stupid. He knew people like her. They never let things go. He watched her retreat back into her house, slamming the door so hard that the windows rattled. His gut told him this wasn't over. Karen was the type to retaliate, especially since she had just been humiliated in front of the entire neighborhood. Justin exhaled, shaking his head. All right, Karen. Let's see who you really are. Justin decides to dig into Karen's background, just to see what kind of person he is dealing with. Justin wasn't the kind of person to jump to conclusions. He liked facts. Cold, hard evidence. So instead of sitting around waiting for Karen's next move, he decided to take action. That night, he sat at his desk with his laptop open, fingers hovering over the keyboard. He started with simple things: public records, local news archives, even social media. At first, it was nothing unusual. She had lived in the neighborhood for 5 years. She had no major criminal record, just a few noise complaints from neighbors. But then, Justin decided to dig deeper. Using public records, ancestry websites, and newspaper archives, he makes a disturbing discovery. He typed in Karen's full name into an ancestry website, curious about her family history. What he found made his stomach churn. Her grandfather and great-grandfather weren't just members of the KKK, they were leaders. Karen's grandfather and great-grandfather weren't just KKK members, they were leaders. Justin's jaw clenched as he scrolled through old scanned newspaper articles. There they were, her grandfather and great-grandfather, dressed in full white robes, standing next to burning crosses. The articles described violent rallies, hate marches, and even attacks on black neighborhoods. These weren't just ordinary racist men. They were the ones leading the charge. His pulse quickened. This wasn't just entitlement. This wasn't just Karen being annoying. This was something deeper, something generational. Old photos show them standing beside burning crosses. He clicked on another article. A black and white photo stared back at him. A burning cross. Hooded figures. And right there, in the center, 2 men standing tall, their faces partially visible beneath the hoods. Karen's family. Justin's hands curled into fists. So that's where she got it from. Her parents donated to white supremacist groups and protested against desegregation. Curious, he looked up Karen's parents. And what he found next made his skin crawl. They hadn't been as public as her grandfather and great-grandfather, but they were just as bad. They had donated thousands to white supremacist groups over the years. They had been part of protests against desegregation in the 70s. One article even quoted her father saying, "America was better when things were separate." Justin exhaled sharply, leaning back in his chair. This wasn't just about Karen being entitled. This was how she was raised. Justin sits back, stunned. This isn't just racism. It's in her blood. He stared at his screen, a mix of disgust and determination settling in his chest. Karen hadn't just randomly decided to be racist. She had grown up in it. It was in her DNA. Her entire family tree was built on hate. It explained everything. Her behavior, her entitlement, her anger at a black man owning a home she thought she deserved. Now he has the ultimate weapon, and he's going to use it. Justin cracked his knuckles. He had the evidence, the receipts. And now? It was time to make Karen famous, but not in the way she wanted. Justin knew calling the cops on Karen wouldn't fix the real problem. She had been harassing him for weeks, treating him like he didn't belong in his own home. And now that he had uncovered her family's dark past, he knew exactly how to hit back where it hurt the most. Instead of dialing 911, he called someone else. A journalist he knew covered stories about racism, discrimination, and systemic injustice. When Justin explained the situation, the journalist's interest peaked immediately. "Wait," the reporter said, tapping his pen on his desk. "You're telling me she called the police on you for closing your own pool? And she has a history tied to white supremacy?" Justin smirked. "Not just a history. Her entire bloodline is soaked in it." That was all the journalist needed to hear. Within 24 hours, the article was published. And it didn't just go live, it went viral. The headline alone was enough to destroy Karen's reputation. "White woman calls cops on black neighbor. Her family's dark secret exposed." The story detailed Karen's entitlement, her harassment of Justin, and most damning of all, the history of her family's deep ties to the KKK. The article included old photos of her grandfather and great-grandfather, proudly posing in full Klan robes beside burning crosses. It included newspaper archives linking her parents to racist protests against desegregation. Karen had spent her entire life looking down on people like Justin, believing she was untouchable. But now, the truth was out for the world to see. Karen had no idea what was coming. She woke up to dozens of missed calls and text messages. Her social media was flooded, people tagging her, calling her out, some outright canceling her. "Is this your family, Karen? You got something to say? You had the nerve to call the cops on a black man, but look at where you come from." Racist entitlement at its finest. Her phone wouldn't stop ringing. She tried ignoring it, until she scrolled through her Facebook feed and froze. There it was. The article. Her name. Her face. Her family's dirty history. She felt the blood drain from her face. "This can't be happening," she whispered, hands shaking. Her career, her friendships, her entire social standing, all of it was crumbling. In pure panic, Karen did what she always did. She blamed Justin. Less than an hour later, Justin heard furious banging on his front door. Bam! 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 He opened it to find Karen standing there, face red with rage, clutching her phone. "You did this!" she shrieked, shoving her phone in his face. "You're trying to ruin me!" Justin leaned against the doorframe, completely unfazed. "I didn't ruin anything, Karen," he said, voice calm as ever. "Your family did that on their own." Karen's face twisted with fury. Her hands clenched into fists. "You have no right to do this to me," she screamed. "This is my life." Justin raised an eyebrow. "And this is my house, but that didn't stop you from treating it like it was yours." Karen was shaking with rage now. She wasn't used to consequences. She wasn't used to losing. And in her blind fury, she snapped. With a primal scream, Karen lunged at Justin. But she didn't make it. Before she could lay a finger on him, red and blue lights flooded the street, police sirens. Karen froze. She turned her head slowly, horrified as she saw a squad car pulling up. Justin, still completely calm. "You might want to turn around, Karen," he said, nodding toward the flashing lights. Karen whipped around just in time to see two officers stepping out of the car. One of them, the same cop who responded to her fake 911 call days ago. His expression? Pure disappointment. "Ma'am," the officer said coldly, reaching for his cuffs. "You're under arrest." Karen's mouth fell open. Her entire world was crashing down, and for the first time in her life, she had no way out. Karen had spent her life escaping consequences. She could lie, manipulate, throw tantrums, and somehow she'd always get away with it. But not this time. After Justin exposed her dark family history, Karen didn't just throw a fit in person. She took her rage online. She flooded her Facebook, Twitter, and even local community forums with threats, lies, and pure hatred. That man ruined my life. He'll regret it. People like him don't deserve to live in our neighborhood. He set me up. I should be the one pressing charges. Her anger blinded her. She didn't realize that people were watching. Justin, knowing Karen wasn't done, kept his distance. He had already won. He didn't need to feed her insanity. But the police? They had been quietly monitoring her social media. And then, she crossed the line. One comment sealed her fate. I swear, if I see that man again, I'll make him pay. That was enough. Within hours, a warrant was issued. Karen was officially being investigated for harassment, false police reports, and threats. The police didn't even have to search for her, because Karen made it easy. Justin was watering his front lawn when he heard it. The unmistakable blare of police sirens. He turned his head just in time to see a squad car pull up in front of Karen's house. The doors swung open, and 2 officers stepped out. One of them? The same cop who had responded to her 911 call about Justin. Karen was on her porch, completely unaware. She had her phone in her hand, probably writing another hateful post. The officers approached. "Ma'am," one said firmly, "we need to speak with you." Karen froze. She looked up, eyes darting between the cops and Justin, who was watching from his yard. And then she did the dumbest thing possible. She ran. Karen bolted off her porch, her phone flying out of her hand. She made it exactly 20 feet. Then, her foot caught the edge of the curb. And down she went. Face first into the pavement. The entire neighborhood saw it happen. Gasps rippled through the crowd as Karen flailed on the ground, groaning in pain. Before she could even get up, the officers were on her. "Ma'am, you're under arrest for harassment, filing false police reports, and making threats," the officer said, snapping the handcuffs around her wrists. Karen howled in protest. "This is a mistake. He set me up. That black thug is trying to ruin my life." Her voice cracked as she realized no one was listening. Her neighbors stood on their porches, shaking their heads. One woman, someone Karen used to be friends with, muttered, "She brought this on herself." Justin? He just stood there, arms crossed, watching calmly. For weeks, Karen had made his life a living hell. Now, she was being hauled away in handcuffs, and he didn't even have to lift a finger. As the officers dragged Karen toward the squad car, she whipped her head around, locking eyes with Justin. "You think this is over?" she spat. Justin just smirked. "Oh, Karen," he said smoothly, "it's only just begun." Because Karen? She still had to face the courtroom. Karen had always escaped consequences, but not today. The courtroom was packed, so packed that some people had to stand. Reporters lined the back, cameras ready. Neighbors filled the seats, eager to see justice. Even former co-workers of Karen showed up, some looking way too happy to be there. And at the front of the courtroom, sitting calmly, was Justin. The man she had tormented. The man she tried to destroy. The man who was about to watch her fall. Then, the door opened. The judge walked in, robes flowing, face serious. Karen, who had looked smug just moments before, saw him, and turned ghost white. Because the judge? He was black. Her worst nightmare. Karen swallowed hard, her hands clenched into fists as the charges were read aloud. Trespassing. Filing false police reports. Harassment, attempted assault. Justin sat back in his chair, watching as the prosecutor laid out everything. One by one, the evidence was presented. Security footage. Karen caught red-handed, trespassing and trying to break into Justin's pool. Her 911 call, full of lies, trying to paint Justin as a threat. Her attack on Justin. She lunged at him in pure rage, caught on video. Karen's lawyer looked defeated. The jury? Expressionless. They had already made up their minds. Then, Karen lost it. She jumped up, knocking over her chair. "This is a setup!" she shrieked, eyes wild. She pointed at Justin. "He's a thug! You're all against me!" The entire courtroom gasped. The judge remained perfectly still. And then, in one calm, measured voice, he said, "Miss Reynolds, you just made your sentence longer." The gavel slammed down. Karen flinched. "Miss Reynolds, You are sentenced to 1 year in jail." Her mouth dropped open. Her lawyer's head hit the desk. Justin? He just smiled. It was over. As Karen was dragged away, kicking and screaming, Justin stood up, adjusted his jacket, and walked out of the courtroom. The reporters rushed to him, microphones shoved in his face. "Justin, how do you feel about the verdict?" one asked. He just chuckled, looking at the cameras. Justice was served, and with that, he walked away, finally free.